Well, that would be the 100th is right around New Year's Day. Take the sound out. Crappy sweet or something. Sounds like a 56 ball.
Hello?
Hello, welcome to another edition of the Grandstanders Live. I'm your host, Scott Kerman, and I'm joined by my usual cohorts, the Professor Russ Stevens, Uncle Joe McLaughlin, and he's the barber to the stars, Hollywood Pete McGilvery. Well, we have a special guest via phone right now. You know him as a longtime Major League Baseball analyst on ESPN's Baseball Tonight and Sports Center, and he's the author of a new book, I'm Fascinated by Sacrifice Flies, Inside the Game We All Love. It is my honor and pleasure to welcome to our show, Tim Kirchin.
Hello, Tim.
Tim, thanks for being on our show.
My pleasure, fellas. Thanks for having me.
Now, Tim, first of all, because, you know, in Boston, it's always all about us. So is it true that your father and mother, I think, are from Watertown, Mass?
My father grew up in Watertown, Mass. He went to MIT. My oldest brother went to MIT. We spent most of our summer vacations in Watertown. My aunt grew up in Pittsfield. So we spent a lot of time in Massachusetts when I was growing up. I kind of stopped as soon as we got out of high school. But yes, a lot of time in Watertown, and being an Armenian, there were plenty of those around.
I was going to say.
Yeah, I'm actually Armenian, Bagdoyan, my mother's maiden name. So yeah, so we know a lot. Do you eat churrogs? Do you know what churrogs are?
Of course. My Aunt Sylvia made the great, I call them churregs, but I don't understand anything about the language. But yeah, she made the greatest churregs ever. My grandmother made the greatest lemon ever, if that's how you pronounce it.
Exactly.
So I love Armenian food.
Oh, good. Well, I'm going to see you tomorrow at the, you're going to be at the Fenway's Writer Series, right? You'll be speaking there, and there's a nice event for you tomorrow. Is that correct?
Yes, and George Mitrovich set this up. I spoke there the last time I wrote a book, which was 7 years ago. Is this a great game or what? So I'm really happy to be going back. The greatest satisfaction I get professionally is when I write a book and somebody actually reads it and actually likes it. Nothing makes me happier than that. So I'm really looking forward to tomorrow.
So tell us about your new book.
Well, it's similar to my last book in that it's basically just a collection of my favorite stories, my favorite topics, the things that I like the most about baseball. It's a Valentine for baseball fans. There's very little heavy lifting in this. You can read the whole book in a couple of days. You can start it on chapter 8 and finish it and then go back and start at the beginning. It's for people necessarily who don't sit down and read all the time, because we're not exactly a nation of readers. But the bottom line is, I have all these stories from the 37 years I've covered baseball. I needed another place to put all my stories, and essentially that's why I wrote this book.
And do you use it as these books as a way, a bit of an antidote to a lot of the stuff that you have to cover a lot of the time? It could be a lockout or some of the heavier lifting. Do you like to write these as a break from the normal course of covering baseball?
Absolutely. I mean, I've written so many words and talked so much about steroids over the years, which is never any fun. I just got off TV talking about the lockout, or the potential lockout, the labor negotiations. So yes, this is a fun book. This is something that I wrote essentially for myself, and I hope that the people out there enjoy it. I hope they get a good laugh at it because, goodness sakes, this is sport, this is baseball, it's supposed to be fun, and even though there's a lot of serious stuff in here, and hopefully you'll learn a lot from this book, hopefully you'll smile and maybe even laugh out loud once in a while.
So there's some Pete Rose stories in the book, and he seems to be kind of reinventing himself in the last couple of years, doing a lot of the pregame and postgame shows and kind of being the drunken uncle on those. And so I'm always been a big fan of Pete as far as a player, and do wish that someday he would be in the Hall of Fame before he croaks. Tell us some Pete Rose stories.
Well, there's a story in the book about Pete when he got out of prison. He was in prison for like 4 months, and he's like 51 years old. And he gets out of prison, his son comes to pick him up at the prison, and the first thing he says to his son is there a batting cage near here? And his son goes, yeah, there's one right down the street. So they go to the batting cage. Pete goes to the proprietor and asks, what's the fastest machine you have here? And the proprietor says, well, that one over there, that's 85 miles an hour. If you haven't seen 85 lately, that is really bringing it, by the way. So Pete Rose gets in the cage, and at this point, a whole bunch of people recognize, oh my goodness, the all-time hit king is in the batting cage here. So they're all crowded around. One pitch comes in, he hits line drive right back at the pitching machine. 51 years old, and he's been in jail for 4 months. He looks at the crowd around him. He just throws his bat to the ground. He says, something never freaking changed, and then he walks away. And that was it. That's who Pete Rose is.
He's a born hitter.
Yeah. Timing is everything.
So do you vote for Pete Rose to be in the Hall of Fame?
Well, we don't have a vote for Pete Rose because he's never been on a ballot.
Oh, okay, right.
But I've been asked a million times, of course, if he was on the writer's ballot, and I've been a voter for 25 years. If he were on the writer's ballot, would I vote for him? And this is not an easy decision, believe me. But I would vote for him because all, or most, if not all, the violations against him or when he was a manager, not as a player. I would be voting on him as a player, so therefore I would vote for him for the Hall of Fame. But I don't think on the writer's ballot he would get 75% of the vote and therefore be enshrined. And if he went to a special committee like we have at the winter meeting coming up next week, if he were on that ballot and only 16 guys were voting and you had to get 12 out of 16 votes, I don't think he would make it on that ballot either. But I watched him play. He's one of the great players I've ever seen, and I just refuse to believe that he would ever do anything to affect the outcome of the game. But so many others say he violated the number one rule: you don't bet on baseball at all when you're in uniform or anything close to it, and that's what he did.
Well, Tim, it's quite an honor you've got there. You're on a very special committee with the Hall, and you've got a very important vote coming up. And I was shocked to find out that George Steinbrenner is not in the Hall of Fame. Now, I hated George, as everyone in Boston quite rightfully did. But someone who had the impact on the game that he did in all those championships, I was flabbergasted to find out that he wasn't in the Hall.
Yeah, he's one of 10 guys on the ballot that we will look at starting, basically, I've already started looking at it, of course, but we're going to sit down in a room, 16 of us on Sunday morning, and go through it, and go through it, and go through it, and look at George Steinbrenner, Bud Selig, John Schuerholz, Davey Johnson, Lou Piniella, Will Clark, Albert Bell, Orel Hershiser, Mark McGuire, and Harold Bain. 10 guys, all with a case, at least, for the Hall of Fame. And yes, George Steinbrenner certainly has a case to be in the Hall of Fame with the World Series he's won, what he's done for baseball to some degree, at least raising the salary levels, which he's done not by himself but with the help of others. And we just have to ask ourselves, what is the Hall of Fame? Is it a place, a museum that chronicles the history of the game? And if so, well, George Steinbrenner's got to be in there. But if if it's something other than that, and you can make it whatever you want it to be, it's not so easy. So this is really tough to get 75% of any vote, believe me, and I'll be real interested to see what happens with our committee.
Yeah, Marvin Miller also, I guess, but he's not up for consideration. I was kind of flabbergasted that he hasn't been elected after.
Yeah, and I was on the last committee this was 6 or 7 years ago, and Marvin was on the ballot, and he didn't make it from the 16 guys in our room. And I frankly was really surprised about that. And I'm really surprised he's not in the Hall of Fame. But this is just shows you again how difficult it is to get into that place and how difficult 75% really is.
Especially when you're kind of a polarizing figure, as the two I mentioned were.
Yeah.
I guess you got to go along to get along sometimes. Pete Rose.
Well,
again.
that's certainly how it works for some people, but controversial people also have a place in the hall.
Yeah.
And it's just a fascinating process, not to mention the regular voting process, which, of course, I have to deal with and figure out by the middle of December.
So, Tim, on that, Rob Manfred's comments up here were in the World Series or at the end of the year with David Ortiz were interpreted as a little bit of a, I don't want to go so far as saying a get-out-of-jail-free card for Ortiz, but were interpreted as a signal, perhaps, that the voters, the writers ought to be taking another look at that candidacy and maybe even the candidacy of a lot of the guys who were implicated, rightly or wrongly, in the steroid era. How did you interpret that message from Manfred?
Yeah, that's essentially how I saw it, and I was a little surprised that it was more volunteered than anything else. And he didn't say David Ortiz is innocent, vote him into the Hall of Fame, but he almost basically gave him that get-out-of-jail-free card that you talked about, and it was a really interesting comment from the commissioner. And, you know, I'm one of these guys, right or wrong, well, I'm wrong because we're all wrong in the voting these days. It's just so difficult now, and I don't want any sympathy for this, but it's so hard to get it right anymore. But I have voted for a bunch of guys who have steroid connections, Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens. I'm not particularly proud of it, but I just feel better voting for them than against them. I understand completely if you don't vote for those guys. I get it. I think David Ortiz is in another category, certainly. No positive test. Nothing like Bonds and Clemens and Manny Ramirez and some others. And it'll be real interesting to see how much support he gets after essentially getting some sort of support from the commissioner.
So you're one of the premier voices of baseball in the national media. NFL is starting to have a little downward trend. Ratings are down. Baseball just had a wonderful World Series and playoffs. Ratings were up. Of course, in this panel, we love baseball. But baseball is king here. Do you feel like baseball is starting to make a little comeback now? And is it about speeding up the game where baseball can maybe go back to being number one in the eyes of the sports world in this country?
Well, I think baseball in this postseason made a real serious move towards football. Now, we understand the monolith that football is, and I'm not sure baseball's passing football in popularity anytime soon. But I think that baseball made a dent with that stunningly great postseason, of course, led by that amazing World Series, including the great Game 7. And, you know, the Game 5 of the World Series actually outdrew the regular season football game that night on Sunday Night Football, and that apparently is like a really big deal. I wonder why it is, but it is. So hopefully baseball's on its way up, but with the current labor situation, we just have to hope there's no glitch in that. Let's reach an agreement and keep the momentum that baseball has now, because not only are they coming off a terrific year and a terrific postseason with great ratings, there's so many really good young players in the game right now. This is a great time for the game to take off, led by Chris Bryant and Mookie Betts and Mike Trout. My goodness, there's so many great young players. This is a golden age of baseball. I just hope more people understand that and realize that.
So I'd like to ask a question. seeing this is a Boston show, can you tell us, in your 37 years, who's your favorite Red Sox player, and a quick story about that player?
Well, that's a pretty good question. I actually have covered long enough to have seen Carly Yastrzemski play, which was
all right.
The captain.
and again, growing up in my house, Ted Williams is the greatest Red
Yeah.
Sox ever.
Right.
There's
So-
not a close second. I must say, I really enjoyed Pedro Martinez probably as much as anybody, because at least for a short period of time,
Yeah.
I'll make it 5 years. I've never seen a better pitcher in my life than him. That's how great he was. At one point, 99, 2000, I think he had
Yeah.
the best fastball in the league, the best curveball in the league, and the best changeup in the league, all at the same time. And I can't remember another pitcher being that good. And I always got along with him well because he's just such a fun-loving guy. But he told me that his first year in pro ball, he weighed 138 pounds and threw 93 miles an hour.
That's crazy.
And I said, Pedro, that's impossible. How could you do that? And he essentially said, God gave me that.
Yeah.
And to watch the God-given skills he had coupled with, how smart a pitcher he was absolutely breathtaking to watch for that 5-year period, but especially for 1999-2000.
So, Tim, getting back to your book, was there an era where, in your 37 years, where you had a particularly colorful set of players? I don't know if it was the 80s or the 90s, but was there an era when there was an era when a lot of these players were just like goofy characters?
Yeah.
And now they're much more measured.
Yeah, I think it was the mid to late 80s and just into the early 90s. That was before, of course, the internet and all the social media took over. Guys were not afraid to be characters. They were not afraid to be funny. They didn't mind acting up a little bit because it was not a big deal. Now, of course, if you do anything untoward, it's turned into a negative, and I find it unfortunate that we've lost some of the characters in baseball, and we've lost some of the funny guys in baseball who realize if I say something funny here, it's going to be taken the wrong way. So that's really unfortunate to me. Plus, with all the money that these guys make now, it just doesn't do them any good to be a character, to be funny, to get out there a little bit when they're just trying to protect what they have. Whereas back then, in the mid-'80s and late '80s, the players weren't making very much money, and they had a good time playing the game. I wonder if we're having as much fun playing the game as those guys did, say, 30 years ago.
Imagine Ricky Henderson in the age of social media.
Oh my God!
That would have been. He would have been a very good follow. Ricky would have once a week. He would have come up with a gem.
So we're broadcasting from the home of Theo Epstein here in Brookline, Massachusetts. So it's we have to get your opinion on Theo. Obviously, Theo has now led two teams, the Boston Red Sox and the Chicago Cubs, to World Series. What makes Theo special?
Well, I think it's two things. Number one, he's smarter than everyone else. There's simply no way around that. I've talked to him a million times, and every time I talk to him, I would say to myself, this guy's way smarter than I'll ever be. But number two is he knows what he doesn't know, and he is willing to listen to people around him. And since he was never, an accomplished baseball player at any level, he really can't evaluate a player, watch and say, right there, that's a swing and miss slider right there for the first time he sees it. Where a guy who played in the big league can see it a whole lot better than he can. So he's the type that will say, hey, this player here fits our club in every way, salary and everything else. Now he takes his best baseball guys and essentially says, go out and tell me if these guys can really play or not. And then they come back with the answers. So I think the fact that he is so smart and he just has a way of drawing a consensus, pulling people together, but also taking a step back and saying, that guy over there, he knows this better than I do. I'm going to listen to him.
Okay, so we're not going to ask you to name names, but of course, if you'd like to, that'd be fine. On the flip side, in your many years of covering baseball and speaking to general managers, have there been times that you've spoken to general managers and go, I cannot believe this guy got this job. How did he possibly get a job? He's not a smart person.
Well, I'm not going to name names, but back in the mid '80s, fellas, it was so different than it is today. Today, these GMs are all seemingly young, Ivy League educated, relentless, remorseless. They do whatever it takes, tireless to get a job and a trade done. Whereas some of the GMs in the mid '80s, were either former players or longtime executives, and it just wasn't the same thing. Plus, they were working essentially by themselves, maybe with an assistant general manager. Now, look at the Red Sox hierarchy. It's hard to keep track of how many former GMs and how many executives they have working under Dave Dombrowski. So I just think the level of expertise in the front office now is so much greater because we got so many smart young guys up there, but we have so many more guys for each organization, and they all get in a room and they figure out what they're going to do next.
So we weren't too happy about the Mookie Betts not getting the MVP award around here because, again, it's getting cold, so that's what we have to live for. Did you have a vote in the MVP vote, and who did you vote for first?
Well, I did, and this was really difficult. But I voted for Mike Trout first, and I voted for Mookie Betts second. And believe me, I had Mookie Betts in there as the number one for a good portion of the season. But the more I looked at it, I just felt, and this is a departure for me, I just felt like, again, Mike Trout was the best player in the American League this year, and he had more value to his team and was more important to his team than anybody else in the American League. And on the Red Sox, and this takes absolutely nothing away from Mookie Betts, but keep in mind that Mike Trout didn't have any help on his team. His slugging average was almost 100 points higher than anyone on his team. His on-base was almost 100 points higher than anyone else on his team, and he still racked up those amazing numbers. And I love Mookie Betts. That kid's going to win multiple MVPs before he's done. But he had a little bit more help in the lineup, including Big Papi, who essentially was the best offensive player in the league. So that kind of swayed a little bit, but that was a really difficult decision for me. I agonized over that, and I'm really surprised that Mike Trout won as easily as he did, 19 first-place votes to 9 for Mookie Betts.
So no sentimentality as far as Big Papi goes.
Couldn't throw him a bone.
Did you ever consider that? Obviously, he's not going to win any more MVPs. Has never won an MVP. Would that have come into your consideration in the vote?
I thought about it, and I realized what a great offensive player he was, and how important he was in that clubhouse, the leader of that team. But I couldn't just say, all right, I'm going to give him a going-away present and give him his first MVP. That just would not have been right. David Ortiz is going to be fine. You guys know that. He's going to the Hall of Fame. Yeah. And to me, he's the second greatest Red Sox ever after Ted Williams, which to me is really saying something.
That is saying something.
I don't think he deserved the MVP just because he mostly didn't play on the defensive end, where Mookie Betts and Mike Trout were way above average defensive players.
So you're putting him ahead of Yaz?
Yes.
Yeah, I did that, fellas. I did that in the last 2 months. I made that decision, and because I had to, at the end of Papi's career, I had to explain to people where I think he fits in Red Sox and in baseball history. Yeah. And I looked at those offensive numbers again and again, and I looked at those postseason numbers. And that was a big deal for me, believe me, to move him past Carly Yastrzemski on the Red Sox list. And again, it's just my list. It doesn't mean anything. But I moved him up to second on the list, and that was a difficult thing for me to do. But I thought it was deserved.
So, Tim, you may love baseball more than anybody that I watch regularly. No, really. I mean, it's amazing. It just comes through the TV. and it's just it gets everyone enthusiastic about it. Who were you? And part of what we do here is we try to we talk as fans, and our guests we love to hear our guests talk as fans. When you were a kid growing up, who were you a fan of, and do you have a little sort of thing in your heart for that team anymore?
Well, I don't know how old you guys are, but I promise you I'm way older than you guys. So keep that in mind, okay? I grew up a Washington Senators fan with Eddie Brinkman, the dinky little shortstop, and with Frank Howard, the 6'7" left fielder that hit balls off the face of the earth.
Williams was the
And in
coach.
1969, Ted Williams managed the team, and they went from terrible to pretty darn good overnight because Ted was such a great hitting coach. So, yes, that was my youthful team. They moved when I was 14 and went to Texas. I literally cried when they left. So am I rooting for the Washington Nationals now because baseball is back in Washington? No, I'm not, but is there a certain part of me that would like to see the team, my hometown, win? Well, I guess, sure, but at this point, I'm not rooting for anything. I'm just rooting for a good story, and obviously in the 2016 World Series, we got a pretty good story.
Sure did.
All right, the last
Kind of on that note, Tim, you've covered hundreds of teams in these 37 years. Do you have a favorite amongst all those hundreds of teams after all these years?
Well, in kind of a perverse way, the 93 Phillies were the biggest bunch of renegades I've ever seen.
Oh, that's Dalton.
They made the idiots of the Red Sox in 2004, look like a bunch of librarians
Choir
in
boys.
comparison.
Right.
But I really enjoyed being around that 93 Phillies team with Schilling and really establishing himself. But John Kruk, Lenny Dykstra, and Darren Dalton, and Mitch Williams, those guys were nuts. But they really enjoyed playing the game, and I think one reason they're one of my favorites is that Kruk told me that after virtually every game, they would sit in the clubhouse and eat pizza, drink beer, and talk about baseball for hours on end. And people just don't do that anymore. Players just don't do that. And I think that's why I'll always love that team, because I think it was the last team of its kind. Players don't act like that anymore. They have a million other things to do after the game rather than sit around as teammates and talk about baseball.
And you
Red Sox did that, but it was during the game.
well, you had the strike the next year too. Which
All right, so the last couple of minutes we have with you, and I can't thank you enough.
Yeah.
This has been great. We're not big fans of John Farrell here. We talk about him almost weekly.
I like him. I don't mind
No,
him.
I'm not a big fan of his. What do you think of John Farrell as a game day manager?
He's not the best strategist out there, but you guys know this. It's not about when do we bunt, when do we take the pitcher out, do we hit and run here. That's part of it, of course. But what it is is getting through to the players and getting the best out of them. And I think he does a pretty good job of that. He's won a World Series. He won the division this year. He's been through an awful lot. So there are a lot of guys out there who aren't great strategists and are very good managers. I think he's a good manager because he understands people. He's a bright guy who understands how to get the best out of people. So I think he's fine for the Red Sox, and obviously Dave Dombrowski does too, because it took him like 30 seconds to say, hey, you're back this year, let's go.
Well, I can't thank you enough. Again, the book is called I'm Fascinated by Sacrifice Flies, Inside the Game We All Love. It's published by St. Martin's Press, and I know it'll be a great gift for all you baseball
Amazon.com.
fans. And yeah,
I
it's
found it
holiday
on
times.
Amazon, yep.
And I know it'll be a great success. And we'll definitely want to have you back during the course of the season. And thanks again for being on our show.
Thanks, Tim.
Okay, that's my pleasure, fellas. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Take care. Have a good night. Well, that was Tim Kirchin. What? Oh, yes.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah,
was
right.
great.
Just the passion that man shows, and anyone who has any passion for anything, I don't care what it is,
I
but
agree.
the passion for baseball.
For someone
He
to
bubbles for
someone to
baseball.
stand out on ESPN or anywhere to love the sport that they're covering more than other people, that says something.
Yeah, and he's a very likable guy.
Makes you want to watch the game.
Yeah,
doesn't it?
absolutely.
he's
Yeah,
terrific.
and he's
Makes me
likable.
want to read the book.
Yeah,
Yep.
and ESPN, they've had a lot of guys go in recent time, whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm glad they've kept him because he's a true asset to watch. And of course, in a town like this, where we love baseball,
Tom.
And we usually only like our hometown announcers.
but we like Tim.
We'll fit Tim in here.
Yes, we definitely want to have him on the show. But that's our show for tonight. Of course, I want to thank the boys. I want to thank everyone behind the scenes, of course. The lovely and talented Adrian and handsome Todd. Yeah. Please check us out on our website. We're going to have Joe do it. Please check us out on our website.
We may not need you anymore.
Oh, no. I'll just phone it in.
Coup d'etat.
Yeah. The Grandstanders.
He can do the open.
Tune in again next Wednesday night at 6:30 for another edition of the Grandstanders Live. I'm your host, Scott Kerman, for tonight.
For this week.
Have a great night.
Tim can do the middle.
Yeah. Joe. That's it. I know. Jeez. I'm Scott Kerman. Have a great and happy night. The elephants are in town.